Welcome back in, everyone. Boys, last week we touched on it was a pod before the gold medal game of the Four Nations. We touched on a lot of things during that tournament, how great the hockey was, and just how great the overall event was. It kind of got capped off in a perfect sense, especially for Canadians, I guess, not so much Americans, but Connor McDavid with the golden goal and just a perfect snipe. Before I let you guys kind of jump in on the championship game there, I'll come out and say it. I personally owe Jordan Bennington a bit of an apology. I was not huge on him as a starting goaltender at a best on best tournament, but in the big game, he stepped up. He made some key game saving stops in overtime that allowed McDavid to score the game winner. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's all Bennington does is he might not necessarily be the best goalie, but in the big games, he's a goalie you want net. So congrats to him. And I guess an apology to him as well for any doubts. But what was your guys' overall thoughts just on that final game there? It was probably one of the best hockey games we've seen in some time.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was pretty intense. I had a few people over at my place to watch it, and ended up getting pretty crippled till about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning afterwards. Kind of just shows how much it kind of meant, just to watch, Canada win on like I guess the big stage, like because that's basically what it is right now, and beating the U.S. I think now that Russia's not really involved, it's always I don't know what is who's always nicer to beat, U.S. or Russia, but it feels great, especially given everything going on between kind of the two countries outside of hockey. I don't want to get into any of that stuff on here. I'm not super educated, and I just get annoyed by listening to it all now. But it did really feel like it was more than just kind of a hockey game at times, leading up to it. And you know, once again, Canada comes out on top when it matters most. It's not a round robin win. It's not a whatever. Like we won. I don't like to say we, but Canada won when it matters most, which typically we do on these big major league international tournaments.
Trav, what do you got to add there?
Yeah, I just made some notes, kind of following the game, just sort of my overall thoughts on that final game, and that I wanted to kind of bring onto the pod here. I would argue that this may be the second best game I've ever watched behind the 2010 gold medal game. And the reason for that is because the storyline as the tournament progressed seemed to shift directly onto USA versus Canada. Sweden and Finland, as much as they put up, pretty decent hockey as a Four Nations tournament, it just seemed like the inevitable was always going to be Canada, USA. And as JC mentioned there, like, between all the political jokes and, the trio of fights in the round robin game, the banter that came after that game, on top of the continuous push for best on best hockey for nearly a decade now. Like JC mentioned already, this game seemed almost bigger than hockey in a sense. Just with how many stories and kind of backline was kind of surrounding the game itself. As far as the actual game goes, it was like edge of your seat hockey right from the get-go. You could feel at the moment the puck dropped, the intensity that surrounded that game. It was no longer just a Four Nations exhibition tournament in my mind. It was a as big of an international hockey game as you're going to get. The thing about the game too was it wasn't so much that it was like end to end hockey, but it was rather like 2 to 3 minute momentum swings throughout the entire game. You're 1 minute you're seeing Canada just pour it on, and you're just kind of yelling at the TV, hoping they're gonna, get one by a hellebuck, and then all of a sudden it's the same 2 or 3 minutes where you're just you could tell Canada's on their heels, and you're just hoping Bennington doesn't crack. So yeah, I mean, with all that, like I'm not saying concrete, but I would argue that that is probably the second best game I've watched behind the 2010 gold medal game.
That's totally like 100% probably, yeah. Between that, even because I think you'd look at the 2014 Sochi or even the 2016 World Cup, Canada just kind of cruised through those tournaments. Like it wasn't really close.
It was
at
just
all.
that was just a defensive masterclass at Sochi.
Oh yeah, that was just ridiculous.
It wasn't necessarily edge of your seat hockey, but there was never a point where you were worried about that team.
That semifinal game against the Americans in Sochi was pretty intense. 1-0. I think it was.
Yeah. The lack of scoring made it intense, I think, on Canada's part, but like you never felt like Canada was in trouble.
No.
But I think just you kind of said it, Trav, like it's been 9 years since we've had best on best, and that 2016 World Cup, this American team, Chris Kreider, I think, was the only one returning to Team USA as a national player from that World Cup. Yes, a lot of the American stars were also on that Team North American team, but so are a lot of the young Canadian stars in this Four Nations. It's more, what's your guys' thoughts on the impact of having guys like Doughty and Sidney Crosby in the lineup for Canada, and Brad Marchand, I guess, in just the veteran of, we know what it takes to win on this type of stage. Like they probably just like just the poise that they bring to that dressing room to allow guys like Marner and McDavid to do the things that they were able to do in overtime.
I thought Brad Marchand and Mitch Marner were equally Canada's best skaters in that game. Marchand might have not seen as much ice time, but there wasn't a shift where he was out there where something didn't happen because of him, because of something that he generated. It's exactly what you're getting at there, Brock. Is Marchand's presence was huge. He took a much different role on this team from that World Cup team playing alongside Crosby, but he was absolutely brilliant when it mattered most.
Yeah, the veteran leadership, like the guys that have been there before, is huge. That's why it's important in like playoff hockey, like having guys that can kind of settle the rest of the group down to be like, just like give them the pep talk that they need. Like, it's like, you guys are fine. Like if you're down in the game or when you're up in a game or, things aren't going right, like you can't get anything going. Like those guys that have won a gold medal, have won an international tournament, have won Stanley Cups too. Like that helps. Like, Canada had a lot of those guys compared to the American side. And all over the ice, like in net, on defense, obviously the forward core, like a lot of guys there, like majority have probably won compared to who hasn't won. And I probably had a lot to do with how they picked the team with those guys, right? Like it makes such a big difference, like the things you don't see just as much as the things you do see on the ice. Like Cooper said that like he doesn't think Marchand was like probably the biggest cheerleader on the team. Like same with Bennett. He's like, Bennett's like, I don't even care if I play. Like I didn't want to miss this tournament. And, he sat the one game, and then, look what happened when he gets in the lineup. He just scores a massive goal, gets in the fight with Brady, like all those little things that kind of help gel the team, especially depth wise. Like all these things are huge, and I think maybe we didn't see it in the first game, but it was huge in terms of Canada having advantages compared to not just skill and maybe a better goalie and this and that.
Is that maybe where the Americans don't have what Canada, like we saw it in 2016, the Americans tried to build their team around guys like Sam Bennett in their bottom six to out physical Canada in that World Cup tournament. Whereas this year, the U.S. they were so reliant on Brady Tkachuk and Matthew Tkachuk to just be the heartbeat of this team. Is it maybe one where those are two guys you're playing in your top six? Canada's heartbeats of their team in terms of emotional leaders were Bennett and Marchand. Like you said, they're bottom sixers. Like, is this one, like, as much as the U.S. have that maybe more of a depth in high-end skill that Canada does, is, like you said, Justin, just the team construction of Canada better overall in terms of how guys are positioned in the lineups compared to the Americans, because their heartbeat guys are guys that are playing 20 minutes a night. And with how they play, we saw it in the fights. You can't have them sitting 5+ minutes a period because they're in the penalty box.
Yeah, I think it's huge. Like, there's no question about it. Like, you can't argue it right now, right? Because, you know, we saw it made a big difference. Like, how much of a difference did it make? You know, we can talk injuries, things like that. You know, like Matthew Tkachuk not being 100% hurts. Like, not only is he probably the heartbeat of the team for America, but he's also clutch. He also puts up points. Like, he can play with anybody that's out on the ice. Like, you put McDavid out there, you put McKinnon out there. Like, Tkachuk can play with those guys, and he can score too. So injuries and stuff, I think, hurt them quite a bit. But at the end of the day, like, Bennington outplayed Hellebuck, which not a lot of people were expecting going into this tournament at any point. And Canada had the best players on the ice at every position. Like, they had the best forward, they have the best defenseman, and all they needed was their goalie to make one more save, and that's basically what it came down to. And he did. But they just constructed the team the right way. I was worried about it at the start because I thought they kind of built their team a lot like how the Americans used to do it. Like, we need to build a team to beat Canada, and it never worked out. And I was wondering if Canada was kind of doing that a bit to be like, we need to match kind of like the size and grit of what the Americans are going to do. And they did that, and it worked out. Like, it just, guys fit in the right spots, kind of how you expected it to.
You brought up Brady Tkachuk's kind of injury there. He only played 7 minutes of the final game. He's probably the last guy that's going to pull himself out of a game like that. But in a best-on-best tournament, would it not be better? Should have the Americans been better off going with a Kyle Connor who's probably a lot closer to 100% than a Matthew Tkachuk who is, say, maybe playing at 40% health for how little he played? Like, would have it not been more effective to have a guy like Kyle Connor closer to full health?
I certainly find Kyle Connor not being in the lineup head scratcher. The guy's been on an absolute tear this year in the NHL. Maybe having a career year. And he was, I don't know, I don't think he was really given that much of a look in this tournament, and then he's scratched in the final game. I think his presence could have been utilized for sure, but I think it is a little hard to take a guy like Matthew out of the lineup just because of who he is. And you know, yeah, 7 minutes is certainly like, that's not a normal night for Matthew Tkachuk, but I don't know. I think I think he could find ways to, like, if he felt like he was good enough to be there, I think you got to let him play. just because I don't know who he is. Like, you kind of said it there, Brock, about the Kachucks being the heartbeat of that team. I had kind of said that from the get-go. The X factor for US was going to be the two of them, and it absolutely was for the whole tournament. I thought Brady was the Americans' best player in that final game by a pretty large margin. Between him and Jacob Slavin, I guess, but yeah, I don't know. I find Kyle Connor not being in that lineup a little bit of a head scratcher, but that's, I don't know. Maybe I'm not seeing something.
Just to get my 2 cents in before you go, Brock, it's quick. I would have dressed Kachuk, but I probably would have scratched Kreider for Connor so that when, Kachuk wasn't ready to go, you got a skill guy to move into the top line kind of top line role that he's used to playing with, those skilled guys. Like Kreider's been so man. I don't really think you needed him that much against Canada compared to what Connor brings.
Yeah. And again, it's best on best. Like you're having first line NHL players playing fourth line all through it. Like every team had that. So it's not like you're asking them to do anything special. And I think it's just one where we saw who was it? Sullivan is the head coach of the US. Like he just galaxy brained the whole situation and trying to basically like keep he's like that's the one issue maybe with both Canada and US at times and how they construct rosters is they still construct like that top three is maybe just best on best, but they always construct like a fourth line of more grinder type guys, like the guys like a Kreider, like a Sam Bennett, or a like Brandon Hagel or Sorelli in Canada there, but like guys that you wouldn't think necessarily make a team like this easily. And coaches just seem to love guys like that in a fourth line role in a best on best tournament because I honestly don't know why, but they galaxy brain instead of putting the best players in. So fuck. Now I lost my train of thought there, but
I had a kind of an interesting little thought that I wanted to throw at you guys. Do you think come the Olympics, do you think well, I mean Canada and US are kind of obvious, but do you think Sweden and Finland round out the top 4 teams at the Olympics, or do you think a team like Czechia might surprise, or maybe I don't know if I want to go as far to say Switzerland or Germany, but that like that Finnish defense certainly isn't anything to brag about. I realized they didn't have Miro Heiskanen, but I don't know. I feel like we could see a bit of a surprise for the bronze at the Olympics. Obviously Russia is a big question mark, but with what whether they're neutral or what the deal is there. But I was just curious what you guys thought. Do you think the 4 nations teams are the top 4 teams of the Olympics, or do you think there's a bit of a dogfight to be had for number 3?
I'll let you go first, Justin.
I think it's hard to deny Czechia. I think you have to put them in that because there's usually always a bit of a surprise. I'm going to go on the assumption that Russia's not going to be there until I hear otherwise because I think that's just too murky right now. But really depends. Like Finland, they're all right, but there's something about them that doesn't like. They were really missing a lot of. They're missing Heiskanen for sure, and Saros hasn't been himself. If he finds his game, I think they have a better chance. Same with Sweden too. Like they have a way better team on paper than they usually seem to perform. So yeah, I think I think the Czechs have to be involved there because they're a pretty grimy team to play against, and especially if they're playing on NHL ice, I think that probably does them just as well as anybody else.
Yeah, the Russia situation's murkies the waters and everything there. But I think the assumption of leaving them out of it until we hear otherwise is right. Czechia, yeah, they're there. I kind of agree with you, Trav. You have to put Switzerland and Germany and even Slovakia into consideration depending on how kind of the round robin and then the quarterfinals get laid out for who's facing who there. Because again, it's a short tournament. Once you get into the knockout round, all it takes is a hot goalie. And we've seen it multiple times. Like, fuck, just last year at the World Championships, Latvia, they've had it recent years where they get that hot goalie in the right games. And you're seeing those other three countries now just starting to get some of that high end talent, which is really going to help them in the close games. So I do think it'll be a bit more of a dogfight, but I think this tournament just showed that Canada and the US are a class above everyone right now. But that's kind of where I wanted to go next. So it's kind of the Olympics. How much stock are we taking into this tournament and what the Olympic rosters are going to look like from it? Like, are a lot of these teams just going to carry over to the Olympics, or are we going to see some big changes on rosters just because now that we know there is an international schedule going forward for every other year, our team's going to maybe start thinking getting some younger guys in to augment the basically in Canada's situation, avoid a 2006, but just augment the delay in what's the word? Like the passing of the torch essentially.
I think in terms of roster changes, it's very minimal for both sides. I think Canada is extremely minimal. Just because it's hard to tamper with success. I think you could maybe see I would say 1 to 3, 1 to 4 new bodies maybe into that roster. The Americans, I could see as much as maybe half a dozen new bodies. Obviously, the biggest one that wasn't at Four Nations is Quinn Hughes. That's like he's a shoe-in for that team. He's a shoe-in on Four Nations if he doesn't get hurt. So that's, I think, the biggest change for the Americans at the Olympics. But then, yeah, you got to look at like, Kreider, Brock Nelson, some of their bottom 6 guys, I think, may get swapped out for. It depends on what kind of team they want to build too. I mean, obviously, Cole Caulfield and Tage Thompson were left off that roster. Maybe they get into the lineup, maybe they don't. It depends on what kind of direction. I think USA's got probably got to look at the situation and then be like, okay, we do need to maybe just slightly change something to beat Canada this time around.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think you tinker too much with Canada's roster. I think, like pretty much what Trav said. Like Bennington's definitely going to be there 100%. I think you can do whatever you want with the other 2 goalie positions. Since those guys didn't play, I think hopefully they decide on it closer to and just kind of pick the guys that are rolling then, and not just kind of the guys that I think they kind of already had picked. But I think, Bennington's the guy, whether he's a starter or not. I think that time will tell that, but he's definitely on it. I mean, defense, it's hard to really deny anybody that wasn't picked here. Like, no one played. I don't think anybody on defense played themselves off the roster for Canada. Like, and Harley made a name for himself, like coming in and played super solid. So they're going to have a tough time deciding on the 7 or 8 guys to come there. And then forward core, I think you see very minimal changes. I think you probably have at least 9 locks, and then you kind of decide later. But yeah, Americans, I agree pretty much with what Trav said. Those 2 forwards are definitely out. I think Tage Thompson should be a lock for the team if he keeps up what he's doing. Should have been on this team, honestly. But yeah, other than like Sweden and Finland, it's hard to get into. Obviously, they have players, maybe a couple guys overseas, especially Finland, that might have a chance on defense there, right? Because I think the only NHL player left off Finland's defense team was Heinola. I think everybody else in the NHL had either got asked or got hurt. So, it'll be interesting to see, but it's hard to kind of mess with success if you're Canada.
No, that's fair. I just wanted to see where you guys stood on that at this time. Obviously, that's something we can get into summer and into next fall and that, but no, it's definitely, like you said, there's minimal changes.
It might not feel like it, but spring's right around the corner. Know how you can tell? Golfers are hitting the links, and we have some tournaments to talk about. And if you want to do more than just talk, put your money where your mouth is. Get in on all the tee to green action with Draftkings Sportsbook. From Thursday's opening round through the closing round Sunday, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with tournament props, live betting odds, and so much more. Right now, Jake Knapp leads the field at a plus 330 for Cognizant Classic 2025. You can also find Ricky Fowler, Jordan Spieth among the top winners for betting. Here's something special for first-timers. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ice.
Let's bring it back to the NHL now. Unless you guys have anything more to touch on for Four Nations. Pretty good, yeah. All right. Trade deadline's coming up, less than 2 weeks away. Let's maybe just let's start with the biggest news and just see how long we go with this. Biggest rumors out there is Mikko Rantanen is possibly going to get flipped again from Carolina. Just from the perspective of the Hurricanes, how much are you regretting just this overall trade now if you're already thinking of having to flip them?
Yeah, they got to be sweating over there. I don't think this is exactly played out as anticipated. When they got Rantanen. I read a post from Pierre LeBrun today that said the Canes should just kind of just roll with the tides and sort of hang on to Rantanen and kind of just go for it this year because the East is wide open. That's LeBron's words, and I definitely agree. I was discussing the East the other day with a friend, and just who the standouts are, and I have maybe 2 to 4 teams from the East in mind, but nobody that's just jumping out in the East. It is wide open, that conference right now. So I like the point that LeBron made about hang on to Rantanen and go for it. maybe they get over the hump, they win a cup this year, and Rantanen walks in the summer. But at least they got the chip, right? So I mean, it kind of is worth it at that point. I don't know. It's a slippery situation. I've heard a whirlwind of teams that are in on Rantanen. I'm not buying every single team that I hear that's rumored on him, because some of them just don't make sense to me in terms of affordability and and just overall fit. But I don't know. It does certainly seem like there's a trade that's gonna come again. The only thing now is that, and this is what LeBron said as well, was that the Canes aren't going to get a Nature's type return for Rantanen, not at this point. It's becoming a bit of a panic move almost, just to be able to get something for him, instead of letting him just walk.
I don't really understand this whole trade Rantanen thing. I'd like to know what their game plan was when they traded for him. You trade for a pending UFA who, it's his first crack at it. He kind of wants the bag if he didn't want to stay in Colorado, right? So, they had to know this going in. I don't understand, you made a trade for him and Taylor Hall. It seems like you're kind of going all in. Why would you trade a guy if you're going all in? It doesn't make sense to me. You win the cup, then none of this matters. Who cares if he walks? Who cares if you overpay him? If you win a cup, nothing matters. You're not going to win a cup if you trade him. You might not win one with him, but I think you're way farther away from even competing for one if you trade him, because you're not going to get whatever you want in return. You're not getting Natchez and Drury back. So, to me, it doesn't make sense. I say you ride it out. I honestly believe that this whole trade kind of chatter is just kind of smoke and mirrors. I really don't think it's going to happen again. I could be wrong. It's entertaining to see because, it's something to talk about like we are, but I personally see him staying there till the end of the year, whether or not a contract gets done. Because it sounds like they've offered him over 13 and a half, maybe, rumors, but I've read that somewhere. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'm not buying the trade chatter. Maybe that changes in a week or so. But I think if you're Carolina, the fact that you haven't won a Eastern Conference final game since you won the cup, I think they've been swept. They were swept in 2009 by Pittsburgh. They were swept by Florida. Is there anybody else that swept them since then? Either way, it's been a couple times. I think you got to keep them, but that's my opinion.
Swept by Boston.
Yeah,
at least 3 times.
I forget what year, but I just remembered that.
That was 2019, I believe. But it's definitely one. I think they made the trade for him. So, and because the trade happened, again, this happened back in January. I think they were hoping that guys like Kotkaniemi and Aho could, another pair of Finnish guys, they could kind of convince him, make him feel more at home. And I think Carolina was almost hoping that those guys would help bring Rantanen's number down. They were hoping to maybe get him around what Colorado was probably offering him, which is basically, I think, just under McKinnon's number. Carolina's maybe willing to go up to that 13 per year. But again, Carolina, this is an owner that has been notorious for not wanting to spend overly big on a bunch of guys. He'd rather spend have a bunch of $8-9 million per year spent on players than having 13, 14, 15 million spent on one guy. So I'm curious on whether this owner is really affecting this negotiations with Rantanen, or if it's one where Rantanen's dead set on a specific number range that he wants, and he's not budging off of it. But as for the fact of like not knowing his extent, like whether you're extending him or not going into the deadline, I think I agree with you guys. Like keep him as your kind of like own rental type player, because like they highlighted in back in the Rantanen trade, Carolina gave up none of their top 4 prospects in their system to get Rantanen. So like even if this turns out to be another Jake Getzel where he leaves in free agency and goes somewhere else, it's not the worst case because we know as Colorado fans what Rantanen performs like in the playoffs. Yeah, some of that is maybe to do with a guy having Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar as your teammates. That high-end talent isn't quite there in Carolina, but this is still a player that can take over a game when he wants to. And if you're Carolina and you get a deep run, whether it gets you a cup or not, if you can get to the conference final and even get like force that into a long series, finally win games in that round, it's not the worst thing, I don't think, if they take a small step back over the next year or two and start bringing some of these younger high-end prospects in, because as good as they've done and all that, they're eventually going to need to either trade away these high-end prospects for guys that are on long-term deals that are difference makers, or integrate these guys into their system and hope that they become those difference makers, kind of like what Seth Jarvis has become in the last year and a half.
Yeah, like, I think a lot of this is stemming from it's a bit of a slow start for him in Carolina, but like we've watched Mikko for what, 10 years now? It was almost 10 years he was an Avalanche. Like this is normal. Like he goes stretches where it's like, man, where is this guy? Like, what is he doing? Like, we're frustrated at times, and then you'd have a game where it'd be like, oh, or a few games in a row, be like, oh yeah, like this is why it's fine, right? Like he disappeared for times, and I see it online. People like Canes fans, like, what's wrong with this guy? Like, why does he look so disinterested? Why, like, he looks like a depressed hockey player out there? But that was just him. Like, that's just the way he kind of was. Like, it's kind of like a Finnish thing in a way too. Like for some guys, like they don't really look that interested a lot of the times, but they're out there trying. It's just that was just kind of Mikko. And then he would put up 4 goals in 6 games, 4 goals in 7 games, whatever it was, right? So I think he's gonna like figure it out. Like he's gonna start to get comfortable. They're gonna find the right guys for him to play with. Like you said, it's a big change going from playing with 2 of the top 3 players in the league, 2 of the top 4 players in the league that he was on the ice with all the time. Like that's an adjustment.
He has a goal and an assist tonight.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe if he starts to figure it out, I bet you this noise dies down pretty quick. Because I think the issue becomes if he does get traded, how many GMs start looking at that situation of the Canes having to flip him again and be like, oh, we're maybe not like, because again, this trade kind of brought a bunch of people thinking like, oh, our GM's going to start being more creative and more aggressive now with big name players. But if the Canes flip him again, all of a sudden, I bet you a lot of GMs look at it and kind of go back and say, let's second guess this. Like if he's a UFA, like let's kind of hold off here, because as much as he can improve our roster, like he might not integrate well into our lineup, and we just gave up a bunch of good stuff for him and all this. So I kind of hope he turns it around here and makes a bit of an impact, whether he stays in Carolina or not, long term. What's some of the rumors, like Justin, you brought out again? We're Ontario guys here, so a lot of Leaf chatter gets thrown into our faces at times, whether we like it or not. Let's kind of discuss that Kyprios proposal that he would send for Rantanen. Well, is Bobby McMahon one of Minton or Cowan and a first-round pick? I think all 3 of us are in agreement that's nowhere near close enough for Rantanen, especially if the Canes are going to retain on him.
Yeah, absolutely not.
And Trav, you said it earlier, like LeBron thinks getting a player like Matthew Nyes is maybe is a long shot, but you're still if you're dealing with Toronto and you're Carolina, I kind of said in our group chat, Matthew Nyes is the first name that comes out of Eric Tulsky's mouth. Like if you're not getting Matthew Nyes from Toronto in a Rantanen deal, then don't even deal with him.
There's no point of Carolina making a trading Rantanen, especially if they're eating salary like he suggested and not getting someone that's helping them right away. Like it's kind of what we've all talked about in our group chat. Just like he's not getting traded for prospects. This isn't a futures trade. Like Carolina's not a team looking to rebuild. Like it's not like it wasn't like Pittsburgh trading Yentzel last year, right? Like who was like, yeah, we can focus on prospects, even though they didn't even get any Carolina's top ones. But like, I don't understand like how fans can be like, yeah, like you can have a Cowan or a Minton and a first, like that should be good enough. Like these guys might not even be NHL players, boys. Like we don't know what kind of NHL players they're going to be. Like, sure, they're talented. Like I think Fraser Minton tops out in your middle six, right? Like probably third line.
3C.
And Easton Cowan, like I'm not sure.
At best, he's a supporting top 6 winger.
So that's not a 56 goal power forward who is very good in the playoffs, trade worthy.
At best, he has a decent career overseas.
I do like the rhetoric from Leafs fans all last year, basically up until the World Juniors this year, that Easton Cowan was untouchable. Now he's almost in every mock trade for some sort of like top 6 forward or like a top pairing defenseman. It's like, oh yeah, we're fine, get rid of him. Like it's so funny how that changes real quick when they actually pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah. As soon as he stops, like as soon as a bunch of negative play comes from him, it shows big time.
I'm also of the mindset of you always trade prospects for impact players to help your team now. You deal with that consequence later.
So then we can discuss more Rantanen maybe next episode if we need. But let's go into that a bit, JC, to round out this episode. Jump to Colorado, the other part of the original Rantanen trade. What's our thoughts on Callum Ritchie, and should he be moved this deadline to bring in an impact 2C?
I trade him to bring in impact 2C with term for sure. I think right now with the way the Avs are constructed, if you're trading him for just someone for this year, I'm not really a fan of it, because last night was their 5th game this year with their full top 6 in order. They're 4-1 in those games. Very small sample size, but it shows that like it's really hard to judge this group when they haven't really had the lineup that they've built, right? So I don't know any names that I can throw there right now that I would probably trade Cal Ritchie for at this deadline. But if the right guy came along that you think is going to solidify your 2C and has a couple years left, then I absolutely would, because, you're not going to have this group forever. McKinnon, he's in for a while. Makar's due, like Taves, all these guys aren't getting any younger. You never know when Val is going to be out. Like if you have a healthy Val, you have McKinnon, Makar, Taves, I think you kind of have to do right by the team. And I also think what they need right now is a top 4 defenseman to slot in for Manson, and probably another bottom pairing defenseman, because it's not working out right now with the way that they have constructed DeHaan, Shillington, what's his name? Middleton. These aren't guys. Malinsky's had a rough go. I think he needs a reset. He's kind of. I think the length of the NHL regular season, just the type of hockey, like the NHL is a lot different than what he's played. I think it's getting to him, and I think he'd be better off not playing every day and getting his reps in elsewhere and jumping in when they need him. But it really got long-winded, but just pointing out all the things I think is wrong with the team. But yeah, I would, for the right player with term, I would definitely trade Callum Ritchie. Yeah, I have no issues with that.
Where's your stance on Callum Ritchie as a trade chip there, Trav?
Yeah, kind of same boat that JC mentioned, but yeah, the thing for me is I just don't know who's available really. That's not rental. The first two guys that come to mind are the two stars in Pittsburgh that said that they're not leaving. So that just puts an end to that. Yeah, I don't know after unless it's like one that comes out of absolute left field, there's nobody who's been rumored that jumps out as a worthwhile trade for the Avs to move on from Ritchie.
So is this a situation then where McFarland just maybe has to get creative with some maybe other prospects or some picks, and maybe including Casey Middlestat to swap in that 2C? Or is this one, like you said, Justin, they finally got healthy last night and Middlestat actually looked half decent. Like when Nichushkin's in the lineup, he's able to make Middlestat look like a pretty good 2C option for the Avs. But you said it's how much can you count on Nuke being in the lineup long term?
You can, right? Like,
so,
but yeah, no, I don't know. Like that whole Middlestat topic is something, because I don't know. You get the start of the year Middlestat, you're happy, right? And Val wasn't in the lineup then. It's just I'm not sure what's gone on late in the past 30 games though. That's the question mark. Like that's the guy you can't bring into playoffs with you and expect to go far.
You should almost look for like a Middlestat for Bowen Byram, like just a 1-for-1.
And that's maybe what ends up happening here again too. So,
would you take Ryan O'Reilly back?
In a heartbeat. I think I think you keep Cal Ritchie because, like you said, Makar's coming up for a big contract. Nichash is coming up for a big contract here soon too. So Ritchie's that cheap option long term. Unless it's a difference maker with term, there's no point trading him, I don't think. We'll wrap the show here. We'll dive deep into a lot of the trade talk next week, figure out what's all going on, and hopefully maybe some trade action has happened before then for us to discuss. But thanks for tuning in this week, everyone. Catch us all next week. Snap it around.